Hi, and welcome to What's Become Clear. I'm Steve Wyckoff.
And I'm Kevin Honeycutt. Thanks for watching. Steve, this is part 2 in a 4-part series that really was inspired by your recent meeting with around 50
Ballparkish, yeah.
college professors, and you were having conversations about education and what are the biggest, what was the
Issues. The biggest issues in education.
The first one we talked about was testing versus education.
Yeah, I said we have higher test scores and less well-educated children.
Right. So the second one, engagement?
Second one is engagement. I said our kids are disengaged. And I always ask this question. You've heard this question 1,000 times. If you ask high school kids to describe school in one word, what word would they choose?
Boring.
Boring. I mean, I hear that 99% of the time. Kevin, I've probably asked that question of 25,000 people over the years. And 99% of the time I get boring. I've had worthless, sucks, and prison as other answers. So if that's the case, I don't care what you're trying to get the kids to learn. If they're bored, they're not really in learning mode.
Yeah.
And so the second issue I talked about was engaging students in the learning process.
Engaging now, so can you define what is engagement?
Well, yeah, I actually built on Phil Slechty's work. And Phil said we get 4 kinds of engagement. Kids that are engaged in 4 ways. Those kids that are authentically engaged, and those are the ones that are so engaged on a regular basis they lose track of time. You've been there. You've been there many times. I've seen you. You know, you get so into something, you look at your watch, and it's 4 hours later.
Brings that flow.
Yeah, Csikszentmihalyi, yeah, work on flow. The second kind are the ritualistically engaged students. And those are the kids that say, don't tell me what I got to learn, what do I got to do to get an A? And they're totally focused on the grade. By the way, that's the group of kids that we're seeing a growth in the numbers and percentages of kids in our schools.
They're playing the game.
Yeah, and they play it well. And in fact, one of the things when I speak at the University of Kansas every year, I ask the students, and most of them say they were ritualistically engaged. Over 90% always say they were ritualistically engaged. But I say, did you have your teachers convinced you were authentically engaged? And they laugh and every hand goes up. You know, they just roar with laughter. Third kind of kids are those kids that are passive compliant. And that's the one we have the unwritten agreement with. You don't bother me, I won't bother you. I get a passing grade, and we both go on with life. And the fourth are the kids that are disruptive. And so those are the 4 kinds of engagement. Now, several people, go ahead. I interrupted.
Well, we see this play out in classrooms all the time, and every teacher I talk to about this, and I talk about your thinking a lot, they totally agree. They see this all the time. I talk about the front row people are policymakers. The kids in the back row are bystanders, and you've got everything in between. Watch their academic success fall off toward the back. So what did you tell them about engagement?
Well, and again, I drew on Phil Slechty and Roger Shank's work. You know, Phil Slechty says that teachers don't know what their job is, which was really fun to tell a group of professors from colleges of education, by the way. But Phil says a teacher's job is not to teach kids. Their job is to create meaningful, engaging work whereby the kids learn the things we want them to learn. Learning by doing. Same thing Roger Shank says. Little different language, and you know, you and I have talked many times, well, our discussion in the last episode where we talked about Shakespeare. Well, if you build learning Shakespeare into doing work, there's a reason for it. Kids will learn it in an engaging way without really knowing they're learning it. They're learning the stuff we want them to learn, but the work that they do is meaningful and engaging.
And I think that can be done. I think creative teachers can do that. And I don't mean creative teachers who say, let's all do Shakespeare, wear a toga tomorrow. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's a beginning. If the teacher was to say, we're archaeologists and we found some bits of these tablets, let's see if we can figure out what they were up to in their culture through the work.
Yeah.
I mean, that's deeper, higher order thinking if you were to do it that way, on sort of an archaeology model. Often we don't do that. We pay such homage to the work itself as if it was tablets delivered from God.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we all love our content. I love art because I taught art. Why? I taught art because I loved art. You know what I mean? But you can get in a codependent relationship with your own curriculum and forget the people who are there, that are your customers.
Yeah. And they're the ones that they're kind of leaned off the side and drools running out the corner of their mouth.
Or I don't know if it's ever happened to you as a teacher, but there were times when I realized my kids were playing me and weren't into what I was doing. They just saw I was wasting a lot of time and the clock was running out.
Yeah.
That's embarrassing, and it happens a lot, you
Yeah.
know.
And as a student, I was pretty good at that. Helping, yeah.
I bet you
helping
were.
those kids.
I bet you were.
You know, I'll give you an example, a great example that I heard of a teacher that had created roles for their kids in class. And one of them was that you've been chosen by the new president to make a recommendation on Israeli policy, our policy towards the Israelis. What are you going to advise the president and why? And there were criteria set up around this, but the kids dug in to the history of Israel, and they really dug in order to make a recommendation.
Sure.
Well, guess what they learned in the process? A whole bunch of
Yes,
history and current events and politics and
Right.
geography, and they learned a whole bunch of stuff. He created work for them to do whereby they learned the things he wanted them to learn.
Here's my problem. That teacher built that. Show me the system that measures that adequately, whether it was a success or not.
Well,
We don't do that very well.
It's back to our discussion about standardized tests. And, you know, do we have less well-educated kids and higher scores? Now, again, and I've used this example with you before, it's the old driving analogy. When you got your driver's license, you took two tests, a written test and a driving test. Which one was more meaningful? Well, the driving test was. And in fact, they send you the book to take the written test. What we're doing is giving more and harder written tests for driving with the hopes our kids can drive better when they leave.
Right.
What we need to have them do is drive the car more.
Right, drive the car and learn through driving the car.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing I say is that we need to teach kids to learn how to learn, because what we learn and what's important to learn is changing
Yeah,
every day.
yeah.
I don't think we can amberize, and we've done that before. We've put all this curriculum in amber. What date was it when that Regents curriculum, when that first curriculum was developed?
1892,
It hasn't substantially changed since then.
That's right.
What the committee of,
Committee of 10.
yeah, we got to get into that sometime and really
Yeah.
take that apart, because most people it blows their mind. They have no idea that they're teaching something that has a freshness date that was expired that long ago.
Yeah. And Kevin, you know, one of the other projects I work on is mynewlife.tv, and that was a shameless self-promotion.
Yeah, there you go.
mynewlife.tv. But we have a conversation much like this with an instructor and a student, typically from a community college, a technical college. But we just finished one with from Hutchinson Community College, director of health sciences. But one of the things they call him Stan. And Stan is basically a robot that reacts like a person being treated. You can take the blood pressure, you can give him medicine, he talks to him, he can say ouch and all those things. In visiting with the student, these simulations are so good that the student was telling me beforehand that she actually was nervous and could feel the adrenaline working on a dummy. And you know, that's where you create an environment where you do have the students do the stuff you want them to do.
right.
Well, you've got to create that in different ways. I remember watching you with a group of students in our class where they each ran their own company. And you created a simulation where they were really into it. There was high tension among your students when you did that with them.
But I was probably more misaligned with the system that year than in a year in my teaching. That's a problem, and I think you're going out like an icebreaker. You and that group of people that having this conversation, you're breaking up the ice so that people can come along and do things they couldn't do before. I was doing this 6-7 years ago, and it looked different, scared people, and they said, why don't you just teach art like you've been teaching art?
Yeah.
And I was teaching art in this other way, but
Yeah.
no one knew how to
Give
measure
them a
it.
piece of paper and tell them to draw something.
How do you measure it? I was teaching life using
Yeah.
art. That's what I said, but come on, that sounds like nothing. It sounds
Yeah.
like, well, it's just an excuse for playing, I guess, you know what I mean? When do we get permission to actually start doing some of this stuff?
Well, you know, that's probably a whole nother conversation. But again, you know, we've talked because of the money issues that we now have in schools, we're a lot more willing to enter into those conversations than we ever have been. But engaging students, I don't care what you're doing, what you want them to learn, it doesn't matter. If they're not engaged, authentically engaged in the process, you're not getting the maximum learning that you could get.
Well, why do we all laugh at wonk, 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 wonk,
Yeah.
wonk? Because we've all been there.
We've been there.
It shouldn't be the way it is anymore.
That's right. Hey, thanks for listening.
Thanks a lot.